Number 7. Keith Swainson. In the summer of 2016, officers in West Houston, Texas, received complaints from 50-year-old Keith Swainson's neighbors and went to his Kingsbridge Lane address. The man had reportedly gotten into an argument with other residents, and when law enforcement arrived at the scene, he refused to leave his house. A 7-hour standoff ensued, during the course of which Swainson fired a shotgun several times at a SWAT team through a shattered window. One officer sustained minor injuries as he was struck by debris resulting from the shooting. The SWAT team eventually deployed tear gas into the home, which prompted Swainson to surrender. He was taken into custody on 2 counts of aggravated assault of a public servant and 1 count of making a threat. For his first court hearing, Swainson showed up with what appeared to be dried blood on the side of his face. In a subsequent blog post, Swainson would claim that he'd been a victim of police brutality and that a deputy had placed him in a grappling hold, crushing his nose into his face. At some point during the hearing, Swainson began yelling out expletives directed at the judge and another person in attendance who'd criticized his behavior. The man was escorted out of the courtroom, but was later reported to have been found not guilty by reason of insanity. Number 6. Jason Brian Dalton. On February the 20th of 2016, Uber driver Jason Brian Dalton carried out a series of random shootings in Kalamazoo County, Michigan, which left 6 people dead and another 2 wounded. 45-year-old Dalton switched between 2 handguns, a Walther P99 and the Glock 19, and shot his victims at an apartment complex, a car dealership, and outside a restaurant. It was also reported to have accepted fares without incident between the killings. One of the spree's survivors, 25-year-old Tiana Carruthers, was also its first victim, and she was shot 4 times in the parking lot of a Richland Township apartment. She suffered injuries to her arm, which left her needing reconstructive surgery, as well as her legs and back. Dalton was arrested following a manhunt and was quoted as telling the police that his actions were being controlled by a devil figure on the Uber app. The mass shooter appeared for a preliminary hearing on May the 22nd of 2016. As Carruthers was giving her testimony, Dalton interrupted her with what was described as somewhat indecipherable statements about people carrying black bags. She broke down in tears and cried out as, moments later, Dalton lunged at her. Sheriff's deputies promptly restrained and removed him from the courtroom. The hearing was resumed later in the day, with Dalton participating via video hookup. On January the 7th of 2019, he pleaded guilty to the plethora of charges against him and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 5. Nicholas Tuinstra. After being found guilty of murder, Wisconsin man Nicholas Tuinstra was taken into his sentencing hearing on June the 2nd of 2016. In September 2 years prior, he'd gunned down his estranged wife Melissa and her boyfriend Justin Daniels. The woman had recently filed for divorce after she'd endured abuse which was said to have occurred in front of her and Nicholas's daughter. Following his arrest for double murder, Nicholas maintained that he was innocent and that he'd been framed. His trial lasted for about a week before the jury returned a guilty verdict. At sentencing, prosecutor Andrew Christensen began talking about the abuse that Melissa had suffered, which prompted an aggressive reaction from Nicholas. He shouted insults at Christensen and lunged towards him, insisting he'd never attacked her. However, as he was being escorted out of the courtroom, Nicholas yelled that she only got pushed that one time, but failed to appropriately contextualize the incident before the door closed on him. He was ultimately sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 4. Melissa Hardwick. On July the 13th of 2021, Kentucky woman Melissa Hardwick was in family court, where Judge Jennifer Edwards was hearing a domestic violence order filed against her by her estranged husband. Surveillance footage from within the courtroom showed the man as he began to explain why the order had been filed. Before he could get a sentence in, Hardwick interrupted him and continued talking even after Edwards had warned her that she'd be held in contempt. Edwards then handed Hardwick a 10-day sentence for contempt. In the moments that followed, the latter jumped over the judge's bench and reached towards her. 2 deputies reacted quickly, pulling Hardwick off the bench and escorting her out of the courtroom. Edwards was unharmed after experiencing what would later be described as a judge's worst nightmare. Hardwick was jailed for 120 days in the wake of her outburst and faced further charges of third-degree threatening, intimidating a participant in the legal process, and resisting arrest. Number 3. John McEnroe. While they didn't occur in a legal setting, John McEnroe's court outbursts are undoubtedly a historical reference point. The tennis great was the only male player to simultaneously hold the #1 position in both singles and doubles. He finished his career with a record-breaking 77 singles titles on the ATP Tour and 78 doubles titles. McEnroe also became known as Super Brat, or the bad boy of tennis, due to his confrontational on-court behavior that often landed him in trouble with tennis authorities. Arguably, the most memorable of his tantrums occurred at Wimbledon in 1981. McEnroe lashed out at an umpire who'd called his ball outside of the court, angrily uttering what would become his trademark line by exclaiming, "You cannot be serious!" He'd repeat the line during moments of frustration in subsequent matches, and it would even serve as the title of his autobiography. The umpire responded by awarding a point against the then 23-year-old. McEnroe went on to win the title by defeating his nemesis, Bjorn Borg, in the final. In 1984, he had another outburst during a tournament in Stockholm when, after disagreeing with a call made by the chair umpire, he demanded, "Answer my question, jerk!" McEnroe then smashed his racket into a juice cart beside the court as boos echoed across the arena. He was suspended for 3 weeks as he'd exceeded the limit on fines, which, coincidentally, had originally been created due to his behavior.
You can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious!
Number 2. Kimberly Kessler. Kimberly Kessler was arrested by law enforcement in Nassau County, Florida, in connection to the murder of her co-worker, Jolene Cummings, in May of 2018. They'd worked together at the Tangles hair salon prior to the latter being reported missing by her mother on May the 14th. Cummings' body was never found, but evidence linked Kessler to her suspected murder. It included the fact that the woman had used 18 aliases and lived in 33 cities and 14 states. She'd been caught on CCTV driving the victim's car on May the 13th and had purchased tools believed to have been used to clean up the murder. Additionally, traces of Cummings' blood were found in the hair salon, indicating that there'd been a violent struggle. During the legal proceedings that followed, Kessler exhibited disruptive and erratic behavior both while in detention and inside the courtroom. Corrections deputies testified during her trial about incidents that involved spreading human excrement on windows, making vulgar statements, refusing to eat, and acting out whenever Kessler didn't get what she wanted. "She's evil. She's evil in the flesh," was how Nassau County Sheriff Bill Leeper described the accused killer. In 2019, Kessler first began screaming in court that one of her defense attorneys, Jordan Beard, was Cummings' cousin. It was proven to be untrue, but she nevertheless incessantly repeated the fictitious allegation in the hearings that followed, prompting her to be removed. In an outburst during a video hearing, she blankly stared into the camera while wearing a smock designed to prevent self-harm, and suddenly screamed an obscenity at the judge. Given her tantrums, self-emaciation, and the threats she'd made to end her life, the woman's mental health had been considered during the trial. At one point during a hearing, she turned on her defense team and told the judge that they were lying about her mental health. Kessler was ultimately deemed mentally competent and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 1. Bryce Rhodes. Aspiring Kentucky rapper Bryce "Rambo" Rhodes was charged with triple murder in 2016, and in the aftermath made a series of court appearances marked by an aggressive and threatening attitude towards officials. In early May, Rhodes was accused of gunning down Christopher Jones in a case of mistaken identity, as he'd wrongly believed him to be a man targeted by a local gang. Later in the month, he fatally stabbed teenage half-brothers Maurice Gordon and Larry Ordway. They'd been part of Rhodes' entourage and had witnessed the shooting of Jones, which caused the rapper to fear they'd turn him into the authorities. Leading up to a hearing on September the 23rd of 2016, Rhodes spat on his attorney. Courtroom security staff placed a spit mask on his face, and he was strapped into a chair by wrists and ankles. In a video-recorded incident, Rhodes told District Court Judge Amber Wolfe that he could find out where she lived. Shocked, the judge repeated the threat to him, to which Rhodes added, "You got family, I'll be out." The 25-year-old was thus charged with making threats and intimidating a participant in the legal process. He faced the death penalty, but his triple murder trial was repeatedly delayed, and he dismissed multiple attorneys during the proceedings. Rhodes threatened a judge yet again during a pretrial hearing in 2021, in which he also accused 2 Louisville detectives of fabricating their testimonies against him. Rhodes claimed that Jefferson Circuit Court Judge Charles Cunningham was denying him a fair chance and effective counsel. For at least the 3rd time, Rhodes asked for a new attorney and lashed out as Cunningham was explaining the difficulty of granting his request. The accused killer told the judge to do his job and promised that he was going to find out real quick what would happen if he failed. Thanks for watching. Would you rather take a tennis ball to the head served by a prime John McEnroe or show up to jury duty completely naked? Let us know in the comments section below.